But well, I would love to hear from you, and for the audience, who are you and what do you do? I know who you are, but I'd love to hear you say it.
My name's Sam Newman. I'm an independent consultant and author. I kind of focus in the area of, I guess, sort of system architecture more broadly. But basically, it's like, how do I help people get their ideas into production quickly and efficiently, looking at that sort of through the lens of more recently, more look at architecture. But my background is kind of, path production stuff, continuous delivery. I was sort of sysadmin for quite a while and built what you refer to as a build monkey. So my background was kind of in that space. And so I've come to the architecture kind of later on.
Yeah. Well, I've followed your work for many years, own a couple of your books. And I'm a systems guy. I would say Subway stuff behind me here. I really like complex systems, but I like the people part of it more than I like the infrastructure part of it. I like the how do you get on the subway in Japan and actually find where you're going when you don't speak the language and stuff? How do you get on in New York without having to worry about the entire system? But I would love to start with the kind of most fundamental building block that I think you're known for. What's a microservice to my business audience, people who may not care about APIs?
Yeah, so you've got your whole problem, and we can break it down into these independent components. That's a microservice. So that's something that runs on a computer. It has functionality, it has data. And the idea with a microservice architecture is I can change that component. I can deploy it whenever I want without having to touch or change other parts of my system. So the goal is sort of, I can get the scale, so I can use all the computers, but I can also get the speed of change. I can just change one small part of it without having to change everything all at once. And that's kind of the pitch for microservices as a style of architecture.
I like that. So what percentage of microservices is people and what percentage is technology and infrastructure?
I think it's kind of interesting, right? Because for me, there's the delivery side, right, which is software is a socio-technical system. It's people and technology working together. That's how systems get built, right? So from that point of view, it's like any other architecture. It's both, right? I think what gets interesting about microservices is it makes the connections between components quite explicit, and they end up often being the connections between different parts of your organization. When you've got like a big blobby system, there's lots of these interconnections and in the system that often are interconnections between like teams you might have working on that. But there can be, when it's a big blobby system, often referred to as a monolith, those connections aren't very visible. So it's hard to understand how things relate. With a microservice architecture, those connections between those components become really explicit. And so you start to almost see the connections between the different teams that own different parts of the systems much more clearly. In fact, I would say the kind of the majority of the enterprise clients I work with who are adopting microservices, they're not doing it for technology reasons. They're not doing it for scale reasons. I mean, most enterprises don't have true scale problems, to be honest with you. They're mostly doing it because they want a more autonomous organization. They want a more loosely coupled organization, right? They want to avoid all that hierarchical middle management, and they want to change their org structure. And so actually microservices kind of let them change their org structure. I think you actually get down to most enterprises there. That's why they're using this architecture.
What's the order of operation there? Does microservices come first? Does the organization follow and kind of deconstruct, or is it what's the mix there?
It's any and all of the above. There's no obviously right answer to it. I think a lot of the time the framing is really important. I think those organizations which say we want our teams to have a high degree of autonomy, how do we go about achieving that? I think they're more likely to achieve the outcome. I think the organizations that start purely through the lens of we're just going to change our architecture and we're magically going to get these other benefits, that pathway I think is more problematic. So I think I see the most success, I think, is whenever you're looking to make a change to your system, I think it's vital that your starting point is, what are we trying to achieve with this change? And I think people saying we want organizations where our teams are able to have more autonomy. How do we make that happen? I think they're more set up to achieve that outcome. Whereas organizations say, let's use microservices. They haven't really thought through why or what they're doing. So they'll probably achieve the outcome of having microservices. Whether or not anyone's happier or you're shipping software quicker or anything else, I mean, that's up for grabs, right? You'll definitely spend more money that way. I mean, selfishly as an independent consultant, I love that. But, it's not good for the industry necessarily.
Yeah, and I think I've heard several waves of that of companies who have expressed that it's not doing what they heard or what it was sold as doing, but then simultaneously I can find equal numbers that are like, no, this is totally doing what it's doing, what it was advertised and helping us, and it just feels like that there's other planning, other organizational things involved in there. And so after, I mean, we're well over a decade now. What have you learned or seen along that history in that way as well? The different waves of kind of microservices in enterprises.
I mean, it's gone from being a controversial concept to an extent to being considered the default approach over the last sort of 15 years. Mm-hmm. And I think not 15 years. I mean, my book came out 2014. The paper by James and Martin predate that. And that was kind of where originally people started hearing about these concepts. And I think the unfortunate thing is that now we're at a place where it is considered the default approach, which is a real problem. I refer to microservices. I mean, this is my focus area, and I refer to this style of architecture as an architecture of last resort, which is I'm going to try and solve problems in the simplest way I can. And microservices are never the simple answer. So what I've seen, though, is people assume they should be doing microservices because everybody else kind of is. And so they are assuming that that's the way they should go. I'm old enough to remember the phrase, nobody ever got fired for buying IBM, which, was a period where everybody bought IBM software. So when you had to buy a product or whatever, you would buy the IBM solution because everyone else was. And if you bought the IBM software like everyone else was, and it turned out to be a disaster, well, it can't be your fault because everyone's doing it. You haven't made a mistake. On the other hand, if you say, actually, no, I'm not going to buy the IBM software, I'm going to go a different path instead. If that failed, you were then on the hook because you stepped outside the kind of conventional wisdom. And I think we're there with microservices for a lot of organizations, that lots of companies that should not be doing this have gone that route. And then they're blaming the architecture. It's like, well, actually, did you at any point actually frame this in terms of what you're trying to do and look at the other less sexy ways of achieving that outcome? So I think that's kind of where we very much are. I think some people say, oh, everyone's going back to monolith. It's like, I'm not seeing that happen massively. I think, it's, I'm seeing still people adopting them. I'm still seeing people doing course corrections, which I think is just fine and natural. It's just more now that you're not having to convince people that it's a good idea. You're having to convince people it's not a good idea for them. That's my work now.
Yeah. And what you're consulting, you go into larger organizations. I've gone into many, many large enterprises over the years, and now I'm doing a lot of work to understand the signals coming out of an enterprise, because a complex system for me, I need to study some of the signals to understand the state of that system, because it's too complex for me to learn it all and understand. And in enterprise, I'll start with blogs, press releases, job postings to understand kind of where they're at in this overall journey, and whether I'm not doing just microservice, but more an API kind of public facing open source. Not everyone's ready, and not everyone's in the right industry. So I don't want to trick anybody into doing public APIs if they're not ready. And so what are those signals that you look for in an enterprise to assess whether they're ready for a microservices journey or conversation?
I keep coming back to that Jerry Weinberg quote, who wrote The Secrets of Consulting, amongst other things. It's always a people problem. by definition, no one's coming to me if they could do this themselves, or where the situation is perfect. Like if they had 100% confidence in what they were doing, they wouldn't need me to be there, right? So I have to always accept that that's kind of part of it. But for me, it's like, it's the people that make the change happen. And so because the change I'm looking at is internal, those external signals are not that useful to me, because also a lot of those external signals are marketing. People don't do warts and all stuff on their tech blogs. So internally, I have conversations with people. So it's starting with, why are you doing this? What are you trying to achieve? So it's the conversations that I have. And that's mostly where I'm looking for that kind of feedback, because these are the people that are going to go about making those changes happen. And, you know, it's you kind of get a sense of it fairly quickly. Some of the clients I've got, they've really absolutely done their homework. And, you know, I have a quick chat with them and I'll start the engagement with them or whatever, and we'll do a few sessions and I'll ask her, you know, I'll get them to walk me through the architecture, and I'll get them to talk through their business strategy and stuff like that, and their org structure, and I'll throw a few questions, and they've done the work. And I'm basically there because, quite rightly, it's good to have someone from outside every now and then just validate you. And in those situations, it's like, do you know what, guys, there's no work for me to do here. You're on the right path. Off you go. I go into other engagements where it becomes quite quickly that a decision has been made that they're doing this, and I'm not. And you know, the people I'm working with are sort of dealing with the aftermath of a decision that they weren't involved with. And so that's those engagements always become a little bit trickier, but it's the conversations with the people. Like, there's no value in me looking at the code at that stage. It's all about the people. It's what they care about. It's what they're worried about. But let's say, typically, you know, it's for me, it's all about that outcome. If I can't get to a clear outcome that they're all working towards and haven't thought that through, and if I'm speaking to people that don't know what the outcome even is, then it's like, it becomes very hard for me to do my work. So that's the thing I can focus on. But that is my ultimate signal, because it's the people that are going to do it, but I'm not doing the work for them. Right? It's always the people.
Yeah, and I like that, because you're validating. There's a lot of noise right now. There's a lot of things. It's always hard to trust certain signals, understand, until you sit down with people and actually understand how they're feeling. And a lot of the organizations, enterprises I'm working with right now, I go in and under the guise that they have this AI initiative, and I'm like, well, I don't do AI. I'm an API guy. I'll help you productize your APIs, externalize, and but I don't do AI. And they're like, well, neither do we. And the boss has kind of mandated that we do this. And we've invested the last 5 years. We finally stabilized our API infrastructure. We've got some design practices, some good governance, some good developer experience and documentation. And we don't know what we're doing when it comes to this. And so what's been the impact that you've seen firsthand with AI in a similar on these teams just trying to get their work done?
It's taken the oxygen out of the room. So it's very difficult for anybody to be doing anything in their architecture, in their systems, that's large scale, that isn't somehow related to AI. So, and a lot of, I think developers are being painted as being negative around their use of AI. In my experience, that's not true. They're quite positive, actually, about like using these tools to help write the code, for example. They're more negative about being told they have to put AI in the products and not working that out, how to do that. So, but what I mean by taking the oxygen out of the room is, like, you can't be doing anything unless it's AI. You can't be investing anywhere unless it's AI related in these organizations. And so a lot of people are doing exactly what I would do in this situation, which is by saying, there's some stuff we need to get done. We'll say it's AI, right? You're smuggling initiatives through. There's also kind of just the general problem around AI, which is we don't fully really understand the architectural impact of that. And, the things like security models and the data models, and, principle of least privilege, for example, becomes incredibly important when you start looking at like some of the agentic workflows. But fundamentally, organizations are still looking for valid business cases for these AI use cases, right? So that's the underpinning all of this. It's like everyone's going, we've got to do it, but don't know kind of what. So I think it's kind of interesting right now, but it's like that's where the energy sort of has to go, because there is no energy for anything else. With my publicly traded companies, right, it's the stock market expects you to be doing stuff. So literally, I had a big client I've been working with for a few years and doing some re-architecting, and they said, we're going all in on AI, and what that means is they're not doing anything else that isn't AI. And it's like, all the stuff I was doing with them would have made that easier. They can't do it because it's like, this is how it's going now. So I mean, that will change, right? Because as the economics around the pricing of these things starts to look more realistic, as we start to realize there's no ROI on the current crop of products we're putting out, those things will stabilize. But the benefit of being older is that I can take a kind of a longer view on a lot of these things, which is it's chaos right now. It's not going to fundamentally change the world anywhere near as quick as people think. There's a lot of noise, a lot of chaos. But it's a case of just keeping your head in these situations while everyone else around them is losing theirs. So, I would also say that some of my clients I'm working with are dealing with it really well. Like, there was one of my favorite clients I work with in the US, and they're about the nicest banking adjacent lovely client I've ever worked with. Right? They work with like small banks and mutuals in the US. So the mum and pop style small bit banks and building societies and things. And their sort of head of tech, he's effectively a CTO. He said, when I was AI stuff, I was thinking about how to deal with this, and I've just realized I don't know what's going to happen, but what I want to make sure is that my developers focus on what they can really do as humans. So his mantra is, I want them to be more human. So he's like doubling down on the things that his developers can do that is about being more human. That's never going to go away. And it was just a lovely way of approaching it, which is, there's always chaos going on, but like, what I can hold on to is, how can my developers be better humans? Getting them to be more engaged with the product, getting them to talk to clients more, and there's windows where that even amongst all that noise and all that stress, where a calm head is it's still a wonderful thing.
Yeah, and isn't that the original intent of compute from the early days? Is we're supposed to control it. It's not supposed to control us. We're supposed to be using it and augmenting us, not the other way around.
Yeah, and the smart people around AI, that they understand that human in the loop is still really important. Like, if you look at sort of the way people, I think the more smart people think about software development with AI, for example, is you're treating AI like a very eager intern who has no idea what good looks like, and you're going from writing all the code yourself to now effectively managing something that writes code for you. Right? There's an acceptance; it's not always going to be correct. And I think that's the problem with that is how we actually, to be fundamentally, it's around the interaction design around our use of AI in that context, right? The fact that those early chat interfaces, which are in some ways the least interesting part of the AI stuff, really, the fact that they speak with such authority leads us to believe certain things about what they're saying, and that affects things quite fundamentally. I've definitely seen like examples of human not in the loop stuff, which I think kind of spot on, right? Really clever. Like, it's a really almost like a dull business case, but it's like a concrete example of like a business case here. I saw was a talk that I saw from the Financial Times at Lead Dev in Berlin earlier this year, and they were doing something quite simple, which is, when a user says they're going to not, so what subscription package should we offer people who might want to sign up for the Financial Times, and if we're leaving, what subscription package should we offer them? And they basically just created a model, and they tuned it and trained it and tuned it and trained it, and we're able to show that this model now actually could do much better. It would retain more people, and they'd make more money out of it. And people, and it was just, that was like, okay, that's just good use cases, right? And it took a lot of time and effort and energy. There's the human in the loop there is in the training and the continual training of the model, right? And the tweaking of it and observing the outputs. But in the moment of it making decisions, it's making pretty good decisions, right? And you can actually see outcomes. I mean, you can see retention increasing. You can see, I think the they found, I think that the total value of each subscriber went down a bit, but they got way more subscribers, so it more than netted out. Like, that's kind of interesting stuff, but like, we don't think of that. A lot of people think, oh, it's going to be a chatbot interface or something. It's like, all you're doing is just surfacing the worst parts of this to the public. You're exposing yourself to all kinds of problems, and it's easy. That's why people are doing it, right? They can quickly just expose, a chat interface and think their job's done. And it's like, no, you've actually just massively exposed this horrendous user interface to your customers, and you're expecting them to be happy with the situation. So I think it's, as always, the technology runs ahead of us understanding how to use it, and we're absolutely in that space here.
Do you feel like small language models are kind of the future when it comes to the, close, tight constraints, context windows, feedback loops like you described?
I think in the current moment, it probably makes more sense. I mean, let's look at the macroeconomic picture, right? None of these, there's no financial business model around any of the big AI companies. Their investment case requires them to be making, I think, what's like 2 trillion. The AI space needs to be making 2 trillion a year by 2030, which is 5 times the current entire software subscription space. So even if they find that money, who's paying it? Because that's got to come from you and me. I haven't got that money. So there's that. So what's that mean? Well, what that means is either these companies are going to go bust, or what's going to happen? I mean, we know at the moment they're subsidized. They're also massively subsidized. So the price we're actually paying for these models is massively subsidized. So even if you get a product into market, how are you going to work out your ROI when you don't know how much you're going to be charged for these models in the future? So for me, it already makes sense to be looking at the use of smaller models as part of a workflow. So think more things more like LangChain, for example, or variations thereof, because in that situation, you can keep the problem space smaller. It makes it much easier for you to mix and match your models and also your vendors. So you're less exposed to the risk of a vendor going bust or their prices jacking up. And also, we've seen situations where those models started degrading in behavior. So if you've broken, rather than having, my problem is this big open single vendor based solution where something goes wrong, I'm screwed, break it down to smaller pieces. You can address those individually. You can start, to repatriate some of those models in situations where you can run them on your own infrastructure, right? Maybe you start running your own TPUs or whatever. But equally, what I've found is when talking to people, they broke it down and they realized, oh, this thing we've just worked out after a while what it does. We just replaced that with our own code, and it's better. But so for me, that model makes sense like now, because that's a model that actually helps me deal with the potential uncertainty going forward. It makes it easier to understand what's going on. It allows me to mix vendors, to mix models, and to reduce my overall exposure and to reduce my overall risk. You're not going to just get there by some kind of top-down vibe-coded monstrosity necessarily, but I think that makes sense now, right? Let alone in the future. And then the question is how you kind of tie all that stuff together is the tricky part.
This sounds like the similar kind of ownership, accountability, right sizing that we've been working on in other pieces of our infrastructure. This is just the next generation of that, right?
Well, I mean, fundamentally, it's modularization, right? I mean, this is what I'm going to do. The reason I'm a bit jet lagged, I was doing his classes, awesome classes in Thailand and Japan with people out there, and it's like I was saying to them, it's like there's nothing new in microservices. It's all old ideas. It's just a modular architecture. Modules come from the late early 1970s. Mm-hmm. We've been looking at breaking down big problems into lots of smaller problems that are easier to manage and easier to deal with and easier to think about for decades. Why would we treat? And every single time we have a new bit of technology comes along, those same ideas still make sense. So for me, this idea of things like LangChain, for example, it's more about thinking in more of a modular concept, right? And it's just here, it's even easier to justify because of that uncertainty around the wider vendor space, right? We don't actually know what's going to happen to all of this stuff where we're building things on top of. And most organizations can't afford or justify doing it all themselves on their own kit because the outlays are just way too high. So for the moment, I think for me, it's about risk management. It also happens to just follow good, sensible modular programming concepts as well. And again, that's still the bedrock of how we should be structuring programs for decades now.
Yeah. This it feels like right now there's different areas of complexity that can emerge in these complex systems, and some are more business focused. And I feel like the market driven, what you just described around AI, is a very business complexity trap. There's some realities there, but there's a lot of traps there. But technically, I feel like we suffer from similar as we're making our ways trying to understand these systems, and we fall into some technical complexity traps. For me, one with APIs is well, we have a lot of latency, a lot of calls on these APIs. We need some event driven. We need to kind of notify people when things happen, and they go from 0 to Kafka in like, one decision amongst leadership, and then they spend 3 years having to do Kafka. And I just came back from KubeCon, and I can't help but think we're falling into other similar pitfalls when it comes to containerization and orchestration and automation and things. So how do you recommend folks kind of avoid stepping in, and keep things simple, understandable, manageable, right sized, and not fall into those?
I mean, for me, it's more about encouraging incremental change across the board. So one of the biggest pitfalls I see with organizations that are looking to adopt microservices is they go out and they think, okay, if we start microservices, we're going to have 1,000 microservices in the future, right? How do we deal with 1,000 microservices? And then we have this huge investment in giant tech stacks and platforms and moving parts. It's like, but right now you don't have that. So my driver is always, if you're just start with one change, make a change, do something. What didn't work out of that, right? It's small incremental change, get it out into production, understand how that was. What problems do you have? Do we want to bring some new technology in? If we want to bring some new technology in, let's bring a small bit of new technology in and let's try it out. And it's just about getting used to those small tight circles, right? And that's easier to do now in the especially if you're using the public cloud, it's much easier to do that. If it's different, if you have to run everything on-prem, right? Because then the barrier to entry for trying out Kafka, for example, is significant. But for me, it's about those small little incremental changes. I mean, I come back to the early stuff I used to do back when I first started at ThoughtWorks in like 2004. A lot of our work was around agile enablement. And it was always there when you're trying to teach people how to use extreme programming, for example. You don't try and give them all 12 of the principles of extreme programming on day one, because it's too much to fit in your head. We always talk about the cost of change J-curve, right? Which is you want to go from here to here. We think it's a straight line. It's like, that's not how it works, right? Because you start doing something and then you start doing something new. And when you do something new, your productivity dips because it's new. There's new ideas in your head. You've got to get your head around, like going from, say, request response-based communication over HTTP to using Kafka, right? There's a lot going on there. So that's my productivity dipping. Now I'm hoping I get out of that to a point where I'm now better off. And maybe you will be. But the more change you buy into, the bigger that dip ends up becoming. And it can just become just a giant trough, right? So for me, it's like small changes. I mean, the Agile Manifesto is still correct, right?
Yeah.
Whether or not people understand what it was saying, I mean, that's a different problem. That's a them problem, not a me problem. But it is just about small incremental changes. So like you just do a small thing. You get a small thing out, you reflect on it. Did it work? Another small change. And you just get good at doing that all the time. I think what tends to happen, though, is that organizations go from period of extreme stasis to extreme change. They don't change things for a long time. They run inside the rails that were laid down by previous sets of people. They don't think about improving anything or changing anything or investing. And then suddenly gets to the point where their system is degraded and it's now an absolute nightmare to deal with. And now suddenly they have to make a big change, and then there's a huge amount of churn. And I think that kind of almost binary state is the problem. So I think it's just more about being continually thinking about the system and what we're doing and what we're trying to achieve, and are we doing a good job? And is there something new you want to bring in? Is there some sort of change you want to bring in? And that's that sort of heartbeat of understanding that small incremental changes are continuous integration, continual incremental changes are vital for any system. And I think, that's that's an idea that's been shot through kind of agile and the DevOps movement. And if you look, the workspace I'm working in now, which is mostly around resilience engineering, like if you actually understand what resilience engineering is about, it's all actually about allowing us to continually change, to adapt. And systems that don't change and adapt are not resilient. They end up being brittle. This isn't rocket science. It's actually quite simple ideas. It's putting those ideas into practice, which is the tricky part.
And does this cognitive load and right sizing and dealing with change, I mean, it's not just about the system. I just did a year doing API governance at Bloomberg, and a lot of the teams change. I mean, people are only somewhere for 4 to 6 months, and then they go to another team, and then whole new waves of people come in, and there's the visa labor, and most of people don't understand the system, let alone the individual parts of the system. So can this really help large enterprises kind of deal with the people change and the people?
I mean, let's wind back to that, right? If you still are a company that is based on projects where you're having people in teams for 3 months, moving them around constantly, then just structurally, you're setting yourself up on the bad foot to begin with, right? We've known for, again, decades that long-lived teams massively outperform short-lived teams. Mm-hmm. If you are throwing people together for short periods of time to hack features in here and hack features in there, you are going to get sub-optimum outcomes. Let's come back to that kind of concept of technical debt, right? The technical debt concept is a useful concept. Debt is useful. I live in a house because I took out a mortgage. The bank gave me some money. I bought the house, right? Debt is useful. What happens though in a project-oriented world is that these little short teams, they come in, they've got some features to do, right? And they've got a short window to do them in. They're incentivized to take on technical debt to get things done quickly. But because they're not around and they're not thinking in terms of this team is going to be around for a while, we're not going to be here for the long term, nobody's thinking about paying down the principal. No one's thinking about the long-term problem. Mm-hmm. Now, what happens is the moment you go to teams where, there's a great article by Anna Shipman from the Financial Times talking about their shift from short-lived teams to what they call durable teams. And she makes the point that once you are a team that's going to be around for a long time, you start to make very different trade-offs around that. You understand the long-term costs of those things. And quite often, another point that she makes in that article, which I think is really insightful, was that when you have teams that are short-lived, why does that team exist? What's the purpose of that team? Well, they've been pulled together for a short period of time. The purpose and the drive of that team is not in the team, it's from outside. They've been told to do something. So the team itself has no sense of purpose. If it has no sense of purpose, it can't make those trade-off decisions. So let's just be clear. I mean, if you're a company that is still project-based, that's thinking in terms of people working together for 3 to 4 months and then disbanding and rebanding teams, just let's be clear, you're going to get outperformed by so many other companies out there, right? So, you've got a foundational organizational challenge that is very difficult to deal with. So all the technology in the world isn't going to help you.
Yeah, back to the people thing. So part of doing this talk, you're very gracious in spending time with me today. We're gonna donate some money to a nonprofit organization that helps kids with STEM, so science, technology, education, math, and kind of the basics of what they're going to need to make their way in the world from early school years into. So can you tell me a little bit about the role that STEM plays and that kind of work?
It's sort of interesting because I was, as a kid, we had like a computer at home. My dad got like an Acorn Electron. So some people will know what that is. And then later on I got a Spectrum, right? So like in the US, you had the Commodores and the Ataris and things. We had the BBC. We had the BBC computers, and we had, the Spectrums that came a bit later on. So I was exposed to programming kind of early on, and that got me really excited and opened up this kind of whole opportunity in the world for me. And it's more challenging now to do that in a way, because back when I was a kid, you could get a magazine and you would type in the program listing in it, and you would get a game that wasn't that far away from the things you could buy, and it felt, oh, great, it's cool. And I think now it's like the things that we see with software, it's all kind of quite intangible and hard to grasp. And so as a result, I think it's challenging to work out how to kind of engage people around computing specifically. I mean, I've gone for STEM more broadly because I'm really bad at maths, right? I was good at science and the technology bit. Maths I was terrible at. But it can be a difficult subject to get people involved with, and there are some amazing people out there that do some awesome things to try and encourage and sort of make people feel excited. Like my friend Sam Aaron, who created like Sonic Pi, was a way people write codes, they can play music, and I just love that whole world. Like that's not the world I'm in, right? I'm not out going into schools or going into youth groups and stuff. So the fact that other people out there are doing that, I'm like, okay, they've got my vote.
Yeah, definitely all the support that we can provide. One last piece of wisdom out of you. So I'm a young student just about to leave university. I'm a software, I'm an engineer. I'm a programmer. I use Claude Code. I've gone through my training. I don't really understand the world. I don't understand large systems, how labor works, how jobs work. What sort of wisdom can you provide me?
I think early on in your career, it's a good idea to be quite open. Like I got a lot out of just almost always saying yes in a way, like just trying to be open and just try and get involved in lots of things. So like when you're going into a company, trying to find out what people around you do, asking questions about the domain you're operating in, right? Your domain is code, right? But the wider domain, I think, is really interesting. I think the challenge, I think it's really quite important actually that you know how to use the AI tools, because right now the job market is for people coming out of uni is terrible. And if you don't know how to use those tools, you're going to be hard to get hired. But you also need to know how to program. So I think for me, it's like that's an interesting kind of trade-off. For me, it's just about being open. It's about being curious. It's about asking questions. Like I'm not going to say you should go out and do loads of open source software and show what people you can do on GitHub, because that's not tenable for lots of people to do. I think it's about being curious at work. It's about asking questions. Learn the domain. That always makes you a better programmer. And that's kind of my two penneth worth. I also do think the fundamentals of computing sort of have not changed. So learning about abstraction, learning about modular programming, learning about information hiding, those are things that are absolutely vital. I think when you start getting more into the flow of kind of building bigger systems, but those things can wait. At the beginning, stay curious, ask questions, have fun, and learn the craft.